Welcome back to Debunk Factory. We've already destroyed Nostradamus and his vague quatrains, exposed Baba Vanga's non-existent written records, and now it's time for the big leagues. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. This is the guy who supposedly made over 14,000 psychic predictions while taking the world's most productive naps, predicted everything from World War II to the discovery of Atlantis, and somehow convinced millions that unconsciousness was the key to cosmic consciousness. But here's the plot twist that'll wake you up faster than a triple espresso. What if I told you that the man famous for sleeping prophecies had a success rate worse than a weather forecaster, predicted California would slide into the ocean decades ago, and thought Atlantis would be discovered in 1968, which was 56 years ago? Now, before you click away thinking, great, another skeptic ruining my spiritual awakening, hold up. Because Edgar Cayce's story is actually more fascinating than any trance prophecy. Unlike our previous prophets, this guy left behind 14,000 plus documented readings, which means we can actually calculate his accuracy rate with real math instead of wishful thinking. And spoiler alert, when you can actually count the hits and misses, the results are, well, let's just say you'd have better luck predicting the future by asking your cat. So dim the lights, grab your most comfortable pillow, and let's dive into the wild world of documented failure, medical quackery, and why having written records might be the worst thing that ever happened to a prophet's reputation. Trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why Edgar Cayce proves that sometimes the best thing for your prophetic career is a complete lack of evidence. Meet your prophet. The original spiritual influencer, Edgar Cayce, was born in 1877 in Kentucky, and unlike our previous prophets, he was thoroughly American, which means he turned psychic predictions into a business model that would make modern influencers jealous. He started as a simple photographer and Bible salesman, but somewhere along the way discovered he could make money by taking naps and claiming to receive cosmic downloads. His gimmick was simple but brilliant. He'd lie down, go into a trance, and his secretary Gladys Davis would ask him questions while recording every word he said. These sessions were called readings, and they covered everything from medical diagnoses to future predictions to past life regression. It was like having Google, WebMD, and a fortune teller all rolled into one unconscious dude from Kentucky. The genius of this system was that Cayce could say literally anything while asleep, and then claim he didn't remember any of it when he woke up. It's the ultimate plausible deniability. Hey, don't blame me for saying your chronic headaches are caused by bad karma from when you were an Egyptian priest. I was asleep. But here's what makes Edgar Cayce different from Nostradamus and Baba Vanga. Everything was written down. Every single reading was documented with dates, names, and specific claims. And that, my friends, is where things get really interesting. The documentation problem. When records become evidence. Between 1901 and 1945, there are a total of 14,246 psychic readings on file in Virginia Beach at the Edgar Cayce Foundation. That's right. We have nearly 15,000 documented predictions and statements from this guy. It's like having a prophet with a really, really detailed diary. Now, you might think having extensive documentation would strengthen Cayce's credibility. But here's the thing about evidence. It works both ways. When you document everything, people can actually check your work. And when people check Edgar Cayce's work, well, let's just say he should have stuck to photography. The Association for Research and Enlightenment, ARE, which was founded by Cayce himself, still maintains all these records. They're incredibly thorough about preservation, which is admirable. Unfortunately for Cayce's reputation, being thorough about preservation also means being thorough about documenting failure. The medical readings. When cosmic consciousness meets basic biology. About 9,000 of Cayce's readings were medical diagnoses and treatment recommendations. He would supposedly diagnose people he'd never met, often from hundreds of miles away. and prescribed treatments that ranged from dietary changes to bizarre medical procedures. Now, some believers point to testimonials from people who claimed Cayce's readings helped them, and that's great. The placebo effect is real, and if believing in cosmic medical advice made people feel better, no harm done. But when you start looking at his specific medical claims with actual scientific scrutiny, things get weird fast. Cayce often prescribed treatments involving combinations of herbs, oils, and procedures that had no basis in medical science. He was particularly fond of recommending violet ray treatments and specific brands of products that coincidentally were often sold through his organization. It's like if your spiritual healer kept recommending essential oils from their own online store. More problematically, his medical readings often included claims about the causes of illnesses that were completely contradicted by medical knowledge of the time. He attributed diseases to everything from past life karma to planetary alignments to spiritual imbalances. While this might sound mystical and profound, it's also completely useless if you're actually sick. The Atlantis obsession, when past lives meet creative writing. One of Cayce's favorite topics was Atlantis, the legendary lost continent that he claimed was absolutely real, and that many of his clients were reincarnated Atlanteans. According to Cayce's readings, Atlantis was a super advanced civilization with crystal-powered technology, flying machines, and genetic engineering capabilities that wouldn't look out of place in a science fiction movie. Cayce believed many Americans in his lifetime were reincarnated Atlanteans, and he also said in his readings, land is rising in 1968/69. This was supposed to be evidence that Atlantis was returning or that its remnants would be discovered. But here's the problem. 1968 came and went, and no Atlantean ruins emerged from the ocean. No crystal technology was discovered. No flying machines were found in underwater ruins. The closest thing we got to land rising was some normal geological activity that happens all the time. The Atlantis readings are particularly problematic because they're so detailed and specific that they can't be dismissed as vague symbolism. Cayce described exact locations, time periods, and technological capabilities. When you're that specific and that wrong, you can't fall back on the "it's open to interpretation" defense. The big predictions. Let's check the receipts. Now let's look at some of Cayce's most famous predictions and see how they held up. World War II. Cayce gets credit for predicting World War II, but he made these predictions in the 1930s when tensions were already rising and many political analysts saw conflict coming. It's like predicting rain when storm clouds are gathering. Observant, but not exactly supernatural. The stock market crash. Similarly, some of his economic predictions were made during times of obvious economic instability. Predicting economic problems during the Great Depression isn't mystical insight. It's basic observation. California earthquakes. In January 1936, Cayce gave a reading predicting the destruction of Los Angeles and San Francisco, followed by New York City. This was supposed to happen in the coming years. Well, it's 2024, and while California does have earthquakes, shocking, Los Angeles and San Francisco are still very much there. The pole shift. Cayce predicted massive geological changes, including a shifting of the Earth's poles that would cause catastrophic climate changes. This was supposed to happen by the end of the 20th century. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Atlantis rising. Multiple readings predicted that parts of Atlantis would rise from the ocean and be discovered in the late 1960s. Unless you count some normal Caribbean islands that tourists confused for Atlantean ruins, this was a spectacular miss. The success rate. Let's do some math. Here's where having documented predictions becomes really problematic for believers. When you can actually count successes and failures, Edgar Cayce's accuracy rate is not impressive. Critics have noted that Cayce is about as accurate as a broken clock, and a broken clock is right twice a day, which might actually be better than Cayce's track record on specific testable predictions. Unfortunately, neither prediction occurred. This is a common refrain when examining Cayce's specific prophecies. The pattern is consistent, specific dated predictions that simply didn't happen. When believers talk about Cayce's accuracy, they're usually referring to very general statements that could apply to almost anything, or they're counting testimonials about medical readings where the placebo effect could explain apparent improvements. The methodology problem: how to fake cosmic consciousness. Let's talk about how Cayce's trance readings actually worked, because the process itself is fascinating from a psychological perspective. Cayce would lie down, supposedly fall asleep, and then respond to questions posed by his assistant. But here's what's interesting. The content of his readings was remarkably consistent with information that would have been available to a well-read person of his time. His medical recommendations often reflected popular health fads and alternative medicine practices of the early 20th century. His historical claims about Atlantis and ancient civilizations borrowed heavily from popular books and theories that were circulating at the time. His future predictions often reflected common fears and expectations of his era. This suggests that rather than accessing cosmic consciousness, Cayce was more likely accessing his own subconscious knowledge and presenting it in a mystical package. It's like having a really elaborate form of sleep talking that coincidentally aligns with contemporary knowledge and beliefs. The business model. Spirituality meets capitalism. One aspect of Cayce's operation that doesn't get enough attention is how it functioned as a business. People paid for readings, they bought recommended products, they supported his foundation, and they purchased books and materials based on his teachings. This created a financial incentive to keep the readings going and to build a customer base of believers. It's not necessarily that Cayce was consciously fraudulent, but when your livelihood depends on people believing in your psychic abilities, there's a built-in pressure to deliver content that satisfies customers. The ARE Foundation that he established is still operating today, still selling books, still offering services based on his readings, and still promoting his teachings. It's become a multi-generational spiritual business empire built on the foundation of one man's documented predictions. Here's what's really interesting about Edgar Cayce's legacy. Despite the documented failure of most of his specific predictions, his influence has actually grown over time. He's considered one of the founding fathers of the modern New Age movement, and his ideas about holistic health, reincarnation, and spiritual consciousness have influenced millions. This demonstrates something fascinating about human psychology. We're more influenced by the style and appeal of ideas than by their accuracy. Cayce's readings offered a comprehensive worldview that addressed health, spirituality, history, and the future in a package that felt both ancient and modern. People don't follow Edgar Cayce because his predictions were accurate, and they follow him because his ideas make them feel special, connected, and part of something larger than themselves. The accuracy is almost beside the point. When modern believers discuss Edgar Cayce's accuracy, they engage in what psychologists call cherry-picking, focusing on apparent hits while ignoring obvious misses. This is the same phenomenon we see with other prophets, but it's particularly obvious with Cayce because we have so much documentation. A typical pro-Cayce argument might mention that he predicted certain health treatments that later proved beneficial, while completely ignoring the hundreds of specific predictions about geological catastrophes, the discovery of Atlantis, and technological developments that never materialized. On January 1st, 1945, Edgar Cayce predicted he would be buried in 4 more days. He died of a stroke 2 days later. This is often cited as evidence of his accuracy, but predicting your own death when you're 67 years old and in poor health isn't exactly supernatural. It's basic awareness of your medical situation. Edgar Cayce's documented readings provide an excellent case study for applying scientific methodology to spiritual claims. When we treat his predictions as testable hypotheses rather than mystical wisdom, The results are clear. Specificity. Many of Cayce's predictions were specific enough to be tested, which is good scientific practice. Timeline. He often provided dates or time frames, making his claims falsifiable. Documentation. Unlike other prophets, we have extensive records of what he actually said. Results. When tested against reality, the vast majority of specific dated predictions failed. This doesn't mean that everything Cayce said was worthless. Some of his health recommendations may have had beneficial effects, and his philosophical ideas clearly resonate with many people. But it does mean that his reputation as an accurate prophet is not supported by the evidence. Today, the Edgar Cayce industry continues to thrive. The ARE publishes books, offers conferences, provides spiritual services, and maintains study groups around the world. New interpretations of his readings appear regularly, often finding ways to make old predictions relevant to current events. This demonstrates the remarkable staying power of a good spiritual brand. Even when the core claims have been thoroughly debunked, the emotional and psychological appeal can sustain a movement for generations. Modern Cayce followers often argue that his predictions were meant to be taken symbolically rather than literally, or that the timeline for his prophecies is much longer than originally thought. These are classic moves when faced with failed predictions. Either reinterpret them as metaphorical or extend the deadline indefinitely. What about the medical success stories?